You've been told to always finish your antibiotics, right? Because what happens if you don't? It'll lead to antibiotic resistance. But what if I told you that there are thousands, if not millions, of people around the world that have been told to never finish their antibiotics? They're giving something called DoxyPEP, which reduces the risk of gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis, but you take it sporadically, just a single dose whenever you have sex. Could be one tonight, could be another one in a month, another one the next day after that. But is that leading to antibiotic resistance? Well, today we're going to talk about a study that says potentially it is. But I'm going to tell you why I think people might be misinterpreting that science. My name is Robert. I own a telemedicine company that has prescribed thousands of men DoxyPEP, but I promise you, I have no real opinion on this. I just hate it when people misinterpret science. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, the first thing we should talk about is that gonorrhea is really crazy. It's a crazy little guy. It's been through about 5 different classifications of antibiotics since antibiotics were developed in the 1940s. It's really wild. To put that into perspective, syphilis has not developed any resistance to the original antibiotic penicillin, which came out in 1943. Penicillin still kills syphilis like that. But gonorrhea went through penicillin almost immediately and has just been fighting off antibiotics ever since. So there's an article on the website, the American Sexual Health Foundation, which says new study links DoxyPEP to growing antibiotic resistance. Now that is a strong headline. The only problem with that is when you read the study that's linked in that article, that's not really what the study says. Now, the actual study is from the New England Journal of Medicine, and it's called Expansion of TET-M Carrying Gonorrhea in the United States, 2018 to 2024. Well, first, what is TET-M? Well, TET-M is a gene that some strains of gonorrhea have that allows it to resist doxycycline. And what this study actually did was it looked at 14,000 different samples of gonorrhea from 2020 to the first quarter of 2024. And what they found was really fascinating and potentially damning against DoxyPEP. It found that in 2020, fewer than 10% of the samples had this TET-M gene, but by the first quarter of 2024, over 30% of them did. And in fact, it was the highest in the parts of the country that had the highest uptake of DoxyPEP. Now, first, there's some nuance here that we have to talk about. The first one is that in 2021, the preferred treatment for chlamydia, I know we're not talking about chlamydia right now, but this is relevant. Chlamydia is another bacterial STI. The preferred treatment for chlamydia went from either azithromycin or doxycycline to just doxycycline. And so many more people with a chlamydia infection, which is extremely common, have been given doxycycline basically in time period with this study. Why does that matter? Well, that's a lot more potential cases of gonorrhea if people had both chlamydia and gonorrhea, and people sometimes do, in fact, often do. Many more cases of gonorrhea that were exposed to doxycycline. But now let's take the information in that study, which is that there is a higher prevalence of gonorrhea with that gene. It went from less than 10% to 30% or so in not even 4 full years. Let's put that into context. The first thing you have to understand is that the number of gonorrhea cases in the United States is dropping. I know everybody thinks STI rates are constantly skyrocketing out of control. That's not true. For the past 3 years, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis have all 3 dropped. All 3 of those are prevented by DoxyPEP. Not every time, but much of the time. If you take DoxyPEP, you're going to prevent gonorrhea, chlamydia, and syphilis, and all 3 of those have been dropping. So what does it mean then that a higher percentage of the cases have that TET-M gene? Well, it probably means that DoxyPEP is preventing a lot of cases that don't have that gene. Therefore, the ones that are being detected have the gene. Let me give you the perfect analogy. Not many of you are going to have an agriculture background like me, but I think you can picture this anyway. Imagine that you're a farmer and you have a 40-acre cornfield. You have a big old cornfield out there. And one day you notice that you're getting a weed problem. that in amongst your corn are some weeds, okay? And you go and you select a herbicide that kills that weed. Almost every weed has some resistance to certain herbicides. So let's say that you chose a herbicide that has about a 50-50 rate of killing that particular weed because 50% of the strains of that weed resist that herbicide and 50% don't. All right? Now you spray your field. What's going to happen? You're going to kill the strains of those weeds that are not resistant to your herbicide, and the strains that are resistant to your herbicide are going to live and thrive and multiply. Does that mean that you have created that resistance when you sprayed the field? No, it doesn't. It means that you killed the ones you could kill, and the ones you couldn't continue living, and they're going to show up in samples, just like in this case with gonorrhea. So now let's take a big picture view of gonorrhea and doxycycline resistance, because that is one of the big fears with DoxyPEP, is that it's going to cause gonorrhea to become more resistant to doxycycline. And let's think about it for a minute if that really matters, okay? When do you think gonorrhea first started to develop resistance to doxycycline? It was 40 years ago. Many of you were not even alive. Remember, I talked earlier about how crazy gonorrhea is in terms of becoming resistant to antibiotics really quickly. And it really does. Went through penicillin first. It's been through several classifications of antibiotics. It's going to continue on into the future. Gonorrhea just evolves really quickly. It puts up one hell of a fight. So this idea that we have to stop DoxyPEP before gonorrhea becomes resistant to doxycycline, that horse not only left the barn 40 years ago, it died of old age 30 years ago. 40 years ago, public health officials, doctors, everything like that in the United States stopped treating gonorrhea with doxycycline for this very reason 40 years ago. What I think will happen is that over time, I mean, this is just common sense, DoxyPEP is probably going to have less and less impact on gonorrhea rates because right now it's doing a decent job, but when you look at the clinical trials, it's only about 50% effective at reducing gonorrhea. It's more like 85, 88% effective against chlamydia and syphilis. Remember, those two have basically no or little to no resistance against doxycycline, I should say, is more accurate. But gonorrhea has always had this problem. And so as more people use DoxyPEP to prevent gonorrhea, it just stands to reason that just like the study shows, we're going to see more and more strains of gonorrhea that are resistant to doxycycline be more prevalent in our communities. So again, I read the headline and then I read the study. The two things weren't really linked in any logical way that I could find, but that's just part of having to make a succinct title in 6 or 7 words. That's really hard to do. I think what's critically important to understand is that gonorrhea has been resistant to doxycycline for 40 years. That problem may get worse, but is that actually a worse problem or just one that was already a foregone conclusion? DoxyPEP has undoubtedly been critically important at fighting these bacterial STIs. And let's not forget that when people become infected with one of these bacterial STIs, their HIV risk goes up, they spread it to other people, and then multiple people have to be treated with antibiotics. And so antibiotics are going to be used to prevent and cure these STIs no matter what. It's just a matter of science continuing to look at, is DoxyPEP the right tool for that or not? And that's way above my pay grade. But what I hope to do here today was just re-examine this science with you and have a thoughtful conversation. And if you like thoughtful conversations about sexual health and science, please do drop us a like or a comment, and we'll talk soon.